one of Hollywood's most controversial legends, yet also one of its most perfect, almost untouchable golden age icons. Behind the glamour, there are whispers of truths too dangerous to reveal, a secret tape recording, a confession never to be heard. Not of awards, but of forbidden desires, secret letters, and affairs that led to betrayal, scandal, and if so, what is in it? On screen, Paul Newman was untouchable. In Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, he burned with intensity. In The Hustler, he was sharp and dangerous. And in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, he wasn't just another star. He was a legend. Off-screen, he seemed even greater. A 50-year marriage to Joanne Woodward, the love story Hollywood called unbreakable. A philanthropist who gave away hundreds of millions. A man who could race cars at 180 miles an hour on Sunday, then spend Monday reading bedtime stories to his kids. To the world, Paul Newman was perfection. The rare man who stood above Hollywood's scandals, untouched by its sins. But in Hollywood, perfection is the most dangerous illusion of all. And behind Newman's flawless image, the whispers told a different story. Not of drugs or drunken brawls, but of secret letters, strange disappearances, and desires too dangerous to ever be revealed. In his final days, it said Newman left behind not a will, not stories of his glory years, but a confession. A confession about a secret list he could never share while alive. So who were the names, and why did he guard them in silence until the very end? Tonight, we begin with the first name on that hidden list. Marlon Brando, a love story drowning in lust and suffering. They first crossed paths in 1961 at a glittering gala at the Beverly Hilton. The chandeliers sparkled, the press swarmed, and Hollywood's finest paraded through the doors. Newman arrived with his wife Joanne Woodward, polished and perfect as always. Brando arrived late, shirt wrinkled, collar open, eyes that flickered between playful and cold. He didn't just notice Newman. He hovered behind him like a shadow, studying every move. At one point, Brando leaned close and murmured, "I thought you'd be as boring as the papers make you. Turns out you're the only one here who isn't pretending." For a man like Paul Newman, disciplined, careful, allergic to flattery, those words landed like a crack in the armor. For once, he didn't push them away. He let them in. Soon, their paths began to cross in ways that weren't so public. Coffee, in quiet Westwood cafes where the waiters pretended not to notice. Nights wandering around Silver Lake, where their reflections moved together across the water. Sudden trips to Palm Springs, slipping into rented villas where the curtains never opened. For Newman, it felt like love. Raw, undeniable, impossible to resist. For Brando, it was something else entirely. Because Brando never loved the way others did, he couldn't. To him, even desire was another role to play. He pulled Newman into rooms full of strangers, producers, journalists, men with vague promises of films, awards, power. At first, Newman thought they were just parties. But slowly, he realized the truth. He wasn't a partner. He was a prop. A supporting character in Brando's endless performance for attention. And then came the betrayal. Newman's letters, handwritten, tender, heartbreakingly vulnerable, somehow ended up in the hands of gossip reporters. An anonymous column soon appeared, Love Behind the Lens. It spoke of a blue-eyed family man torn between a picture-perfect marriage and a forbidden affair with a dark-haired icon. No names were mentioned, but everyone in Hollywood knew who it pointed to. Some whispered that Brando himself had delivered those letters, slipping them into a newsroom just to stir the pot. Others claimed Newman's words were read aloud at smoky, late-night gatherings in Laurel Canyon, passed around like a script for Brando's amusement. Because Brando needed scandal the way other men need air. He needed his name in print, his face in the headlines, his legend kept alive by fire, even if someone else burned to ash. And that someone was Newman. At home, Joanne found one of those letters tucked inside a book. She didn't scream. She didn't leave. She quietly wrote her husband a note. "If you need refuge, I'm here. But if you need another lie, I can't help you." Newman kept it folded away for years, a reminder of the cost of silence. That winter in Connecticut was brutal. Neighbors remembered he rarely left the house. His daughter Nell recalled waking in the night to see him pacing the porch in the freezing dark, cigarette glowing faintly in the wind. He never explained. No one asked. Everyone knew. The whispers didn't stop. They grew darker. Rumors of midnight phone calls from Brando, left unanswered. Envelopes slipped under Newman's door with photographs too grainy to prove, too suggestive to ignore. Some swore they had seen pictures of the two together, though those images seemed to vanish before anyone could prove they were real. Whether destroyed by Brando himself or buried by studio power, no one could say. Newman, in his silence, carried the weight alone. In a tape said to have been recorded in his final days, his voice trembled. "I thought if I loved him long enough, he would change. But he didn't. He turned every feeling into a tool. And I let him turn me into one too. I loved him in a way no one should love anyone." Their story never exploded in scandal. It didn't end in a fight or a public breakup. It ended in silence. Newman stopped answering calls, stopped writing letters, stopped believing love could change a man who never wanted to be changed. But silence doesn't erase pain. For years, Newman carried the scar of that affair. Because some wounds don't heal. They only hide. And Marlon Brando, the most magnetic, most dangerous man in Hollywood, was only the beginning. The second name on Newman's hidden list? Steve McQueen. If Brando was a storm of seduction and betrayal, McQueen was fire, relentless, consuming, and impossible to control. A fire that lit up everything around it and burned anyone who got too close. Newman once described him with just 2 words: "That bastard." Words spit out not casually, but like the release of decades of rage. Because McQueen wasn't just another secret. He was a scar Newman carried for life. Some say it began in the shadows of an award night where Newman was the polished family man and McQueen was still raw and hungry. That night, his stare was impossible to ignore. Defiant, almost possessive. The kind of stare that told Newman his life would never be the same. What started as fleeting encounters soon turned into something far more dangerous. Hours stolen in dim hotel rooms, staff whispering about the blue-eyed star who slipped in after midnight and left before dawn. Rumors of shouting matches that ended in eerie silence, broken only by glass shattering against the walls. Neighbors spoke of doors slamming, of voices rising, of a presence in the hallways that sent chills long after they'd gone. To Newman, it was intoxicating and terrifying all at once. To McQueen, it was never love, it was possession. He didn't just want Newman close, he wanted to own him, to prove that even Hollywood's golden husband could be bent, broken, and claimed. Soon the whispers reached the press. Hints of McQueen's unusual friendships surfaced in gossip columns. Almost overnight, he staged public appearances with glamorous women, flashing smiles that dared anyone to question him. Behind closed doors, Newman found himself cornered. A legal document slid across the table, a whisper in his ear, "You have a wife, a daughter. Don't destroy them just because you're too weak." It wasn't only intimidation, it was control. Entire stories disappeared before they could be printed. Reporters silenced. Editors suddenly changing their tune. Some even claimed McQueen had a network of allies in studios and tabloids, people willing to erase anything for a price. And when he wanted to twist the knife, he did it in public. In one interview, asked about a man who had once been obsessed with him, McQueen smirked. "I don't remember his name. Probably an overzealous fan, the creepy kind who sends letters and knocks on your door in the middle of the night." Newman heard it, and he understood. McQueen hadn't just denied him, he had turned their intimacy into a punchline. Their rivalry between them spilled onto film sets. To the world, it looked like two stars battling for attention. But behind the curtain, the tension was personal, raw, and merciless. Newman once confronted him, his voice cracking with rage. "Why did you make me look like a lunatic to the whole world?" McQueen only smiled, opened a drawer, and tossed out a cassette tape, just in case. Whispers claim he kept dozens of those tapes. Every confession, every fight, every weakness Newman had ever revealed, locked away like ammunition. Some even said he kept them in a locked box under his bed, a private arsenal no one dared touch. And then there was the gift. A box left at McQueen's doorstep. Inside, a torn shirt from a night blurred by whiskey and violence. The fabric stained, the scent of liquor still clinging to it, with faint lipstick marks pressed into the collar. Some who heard the story swore the shirt wasn't the only thing in the box, that there was also a single Polaroid, its image too damaged to make out clearly, but unsettling enough to leave McQueen shaken. It wasn't a keepsake, it was a warning. In a tape said to have been recorded during his final days, Newman confessed, "He used love like a knife. Every embrace was a cut. And still I went back. I still loved him, even knowing he'd be the one to kill me if I let him closer." There was no clean break, no farewell, no closure. Newman withdrew into silence, while McQueen paraded a picture-perfect life before the cameras. But silence doesn't erase fire. It only leaves behind smoke, ashes, and scars. And as Newman staggered from that blaze, another figure appeared on the horizon, softer, warmer, but no less dangerous to his heart. Hollywood adored them. On screen, they were the perfect match. Two outlaws riding into legend, their partnership so effortless it felt like fate. Newman, the cunning charmer with the piercing blue eyes, Redford, the cool rebel with danger in his smile. The world saw brotherhood, brilliance, the kind of chemistry no studio could ever manufacture. But whispers said the cameras only caught half the story, because when the crew packed up for the day, when the lights shut off and the canyons fell silent, something else flickered between them. Something unscripted, something forbidden. A lighting technician once claimed he walked past Redford's motel balcony late one night and saw Newman standing there, cigarette in hand, eyes rimmed red, like he was waiting. Moments later, Redford opened the door, pulled him inside, and they disappeared into the dark. The technician said he never spoke of it again, but he never forgot it either. Others on set noticed smaller things. How Newman would linger at the end of a scene, his hand brushing Redford's shoulder just a second too long. How Redford's eyes followed Newman when he thought no one was watching. How the two of them slipped away on weekends with excuses that never quite added up. A driver once recalled being told to drop them at opposite ends of a canyon trail, only to see them return together at sunrise, silent but inseparable. To Newman, it was more than attraction, it was love. Fragile, dangerous, impossible, but real. In a tape whispered to exist, he admitted, "We both had families, reputations, lives built for the public. But when it was just us, I loved him in a way that didn't fit anywhere else. I waited for the day he would love me in the light as he did in the shadows. That day never came." Because Redford was careful, always careful. To the press, he was golden, the family man, the all-American hero. And when whispers of their closeness began leaking out, he made his choice. Silence, protection, distance. Some journalists claimed Newman had once prepared to tell the truth. But just before the words could be spoken, stories began to surface. Vicious stories painting him as unstable, erratic, even dangerous. No names were printed, but the implications were clear. His career stalled, invitations slowed, and through it all, Redford never spoke a word in his defense. There were darker whispers, too, of anonymous faxes sent to editors, of phone calls in the night warning them off Newman's side of the story. Nothing provable, nothing traceable, but enough to ensure silence. Newman's own journal, fragments that have been described but never shown, held one line that cut deeper than any rumor. "The man who called me light now uses me as shadow." The betrayal wasn't loud. It was quiet, cold. Redford didn't just deny Newman, he erased him. And yet, the silence between them spoke louder than any scandal could. At award shows, when asked about Newman, Redford would smile politely, change the subject, and walk away. That smile, that silence, broke Newman more than any headline. One crew member from their later collaborations once said he caught Newman staring at Redford across a crowded room, as if willing him to acknowledge what they both knew. Redford glanced back, then turned away, leaving Newman frozen in the kind of pain only two people can understand. Their story didn't end with a breakup, or even a fight. It ended with deliberate distance. A silence that stretched on for decades. A silence Newman carried to his grave, because sometimes betrayal doesn't come with knives or shouting matches. Sometimes betrayal comes with a smile on stage, a handshake for the cameras, and a silence that leaves the other person bleeding inside. And though the world celebrated their partnership, what lived behind the curtain was a secret that broke Newman in ways no audience would ever see. But Redford wasn't the last name. The silence he left behind was soon filled by someone younger, wilder, a rebel whose star burned so brightly it could never last. A young, rebellious soul, burning, untamed, gone far too soon. Have you guessed? James Dean. Not the loudest scandal in Newman's life, but the one that cut the deepest. The love that began with admiration grew into something undeniable, and ended in a heartbreak that haunted him to the grave. They met in the shadows of Hollywood's golden machine, two men painted as rivals but drawn together like magnets. On set, people joked they looked like two versions of the same star. Newman was steady, polished, with a wife and a carefully built life. Dean was younger, raw, reckless, a flame that dared the world to watch him burn. When he first locked eyes with Newman, it wasn't rivalry, it was recognition. Something in that gaze followed Newman home at night, refusing to let him sleep. They slipped into each other's worlds quietly. A corner booth in a diner at midnight, jukebox humming low. Drives down forgotten highways in Dean's silver Porsche, headlights slicing through the dark. Hidden afternoons in borrowed cabins, where they rehearsed lines no one would ever hear. Lines that turned into confessions whispered between breaths. Dean once told Newman after a storm-soaked premiere, "I don't need anyone to understand me. I just need you not to pretend." Newman didn't reply. He only pressed Dean's hand against his chest, where his heartbeat betrayed everything he couldn't say. But Hollywood's beauty never lasted long. One night, a crew member swore he saw them through a fogged car window, their faces pressed too close to be just friends. A photograph was rumored to exist, but it vanished before any paper could print it. Still, whispers ran through every studio hallway. A blind item appeared, two silver screen rebels sharing more than a script. No names, but everyone knew, and in Hollywood, knowing was enough to destroy. Suddenly, calls stopped coming, invitations dried up, then came the threats, subtle but chilling. Newman found an unmarked envelope beneath his door. Inside, a matchbook from a Sunset Boulevard bar with a line scrawled inside the flap, "Careful. Stars burn out fastest in the dark." Others tell of a late-night call, Newman alone in his kitchen. A raspy voice said, "If you want to live, forget him." The glass in his hand slipped, shattering across the floor. Dean unraveled. His calls to Newman grew desperate. His nights longer, his silences darker. Newman once drove across town at 3 a.m., pounding on Dean's door until his knuckles bled. No answer. Only a scrap of paper slid under the crack. "If loving you is wrong, then I don't deserve to live." Days later, Dean collapsed. The press softened it as exhaustion. Another Hollywood breakdown. Newman knew better. He carried the guilt like a second skin. The push and pull tore them apart. Dean begged for truth, Newman clung to silence, family, reputation, the unbreakable cage around his life. Then came the final plea. Mexico, Friday. If you don't come, I'll understand. Newman bought the ticket. He even drove to the airport. But fear was heavier than love. He turned back, and then it was too late. The wreck of the Porsche was hauled to a garage, a twisted coffin of steel and glass. Some whispered Newman went there in secret, begging to see it. The mechanic refused, but slipped him a shard of the rearview mirror. Blood-specked, cracked, impossible to forget. 24 years old, gone in an instant. Radios across America broke the news. Newman sat frozen, staring at his hands. Later, in a recording said to be made near his own death, he whispered, "They weren't shaking, not a tear, only one question. Why didn't I get on that plane? If I had gone, would he still be alive?" He never spoke Dean's name again. But friends swore that on lonely nights, when the whiskey glass was empty, he would look at the ceiling and whisper, "I'm sorry. You should have lived a brilliant life." And tucked away in his bedside drawer, until the very end, was a single keepsake, a faded silver handkerchief. No one knew how he got it, but everyone knew who it belonged to. The next name was not a superstar, not a legend on billboards, not the kind of man who could dominate a room like Brando or McQueen. He was someone Hollywood tried to forget, someone who reminded Newman of everything fragile, everything real. Sal Mineo. By the mid-70s, Newman looked like perfection to the world. Still polite, still magnetic, still the man America trusted as its model husband. But inside, he was wrecked. Brando had scarred him. McQueen had burned him. Redford had betrayed him. Dean's ghost still haunted him. Newman walked through life like a man wearing an immaculate mask, while underneath, he was crumbling. And that's when Sal appeared. Not in a glamorous setting, not at a studio party, but in a therapist's office in West Hollywood on a rain-soaked afternoon. Joanne, always patient, had gently pushed Paul toward counseling, hoping he might find a way to breathe again. And there, across the waiting room, was Mineo. Hollywood had once called him the next James Dean, but the machine that built him had also broken him. Too soft, too open, too unwilling to fake what others demanded. The studios turned away. Whispers about his desires became rumors, then chains. Roles dried up. Invitations stopped coming. He was branded a liability. They spoke quietly at first, not as lovers, not even as friends. Just two men who recognized the same exhaustion in each other's eyes. After therapy sessions, they'd wander down side streets in the drizzle, coats pulled tight, saying little. It wasn't words they needed, it was silence, and the rare comfort of someone who understood. "Are you sick too?" Newman asked one evening as they paused under a flickering neon sign. Mineo smiled faintly, touched his temple, and whispered, "Not sick, just trying to unlearn what the world told me was a disease." From then, something gentle began to grow. No wild affairs, no scandals. Just moments. A note slipped into Newman's pocket. "If they call you broken, then let me be broken with you." Newman carried it in his wallet like a secret prayer. Another time, Mineo left a cassette on Paul's doorstep, nothing more than a single piano melody he had recorded at home. Newman would play it alone at night, long after everyone else had gone to bed. There were plans too, a trip to Venice. A script Mineo had drafted about two men in a drowning city, clinging to each other as the waters rose. For the first time in years, Newman allowed himself to imagine a different kind of life, a quiet one, without cameras, without lies. But Hollywood doesn't let men like Sal Mineo dream for long. One February night after leaving a rehearsal, Mineo never made it inside his apartment. A shadow moved in the alley. A knife flashed once, twice. The police filed it as a robbery. The papers called it tragedy. But among friends, the whispers never stopped. They said it wasn't random. They said it was punishment, a warning to anyone who dared to live too openly. When Newman heard, he locked himself away. Friends said he disappeared to the rooftop for nights on end, chain-smoking under the stars, staring at the city as though waiting for Sal to walk out of the dark. He never mentioned the name aloud again. But Joanne once found a handkerchief folded in his drawer, stitched with Sal's initials. On the tape, his voice broke. I thought I was saving him. But it was Sal who saved me. He showed me that love didn't have to be loud or cruel or hidden. He only asked me to be myself, and I never got to thank him. The next shadow in Newman's hidden life was Montgomery Clift. Newman once said, in a voice that trembled like it carried a lifetime, I thought nothing could break me, until Monty. Their connection wasn't built on scandal or fury, but on wounds. They found each other in the cracks, two men who looked perfect under the lights but were quietly falling apart in the dark. Their bond grew not from passion alone, but from pain. Letters passed between them, scrawled in blue ink, words shaking across the page as though they weighed 100 pounds each. Half confession, half plea. Monty once wrote, I don't need you to choose me. I just need you not to pretend I don't exist. They weren't love letters. They were survival notes. Fragments of truth too fragile for Hollywood to ever see. And then one of those letters vanished. Some claimed it was stolen by an assistant desperate to climb. Others whispered it was deliberately planted. A knife slipped between Newman's ribs by someone who wanted him exposed. Within weeks, the gossip columns began circling like vultures. Headlines danced around the truth, never naming names, but sharp enough to wound. For the first time, the golden husband of America looked human, vulnerable. Joanne didn't need the papers. She discovered the truth at home. One night, she found an opened envelope slipped beneath her pillow. Monty's words stared back at her. She didn't confront Paul. She left only one line. If you choose lies, don't ask me to live inside them. Then came the silence. Newman unraveled. Not because Hollywood whispered, but because the two lives he tried to hold together were both breaking. The wife who trusted him, and the man who begged him not to hide. Friends whispered that he vanished for days, checking into hotels under false names, retreating to cabins with curtains drawn. A housekeeper once claimed she saw him burning letters in the fireplace, watching the ashes fall until dawn. Doctors appeared quietly at back doors, prescriptions slipped into unmarked bottles. Newman never explained. He didn't have to. Everyone knew. Monty, meanwhile, spiraled. Alone in New York, drowning in pills and isolation, his body carried the weight of every wound, every secret. One night, the phone rang. Newman answered. On the other end, Monty's voice cracked. I can't be your shadow anymore. I can't live this way. Newman begged, pleaded. He promised the unthinkable, that he would stop hiding, stop lying, go public no matter the cost. There was a pause, and then silence. The line went dead. Weeks later, whispers spread. Monty had been found unconscious. An ambulance in the night, a hospital bed. He lived, but he never spoke to Newman again. To Paul, it was worse than death. It was exile, erasure. Years passed. Newman carried on, smiling for cameras, racing cars, playing roles the world adored. But inside, he bled quietly. When the call finally came, Monty was dead, alone in his house, his heart and body worn down. Newman shattered. Some said he screamed, hurling glass against the wall until it broke. Others swore he didn't move at all, just sat frozen, staring at his hands. One rumor claimed he kept a single item of Monty's, hidden in his desk. A lighter engraved with initials no one ever dared to ask about. Another whispered that on certain nights after too much whiskey, Newman would drive aimlessly for hours, ending up outside cemeteries, headlights burning into the dark. What is certain is what Newman later confessed on tape. I thought I was strong, but I was a coward. I only knew how to love in silence. And the tape didn't end with closure. It ended the way their story did, with silence, heavy, suffocating silence. Maybe that silence, heavier than betrayal, heavier than scandal, was the cruelest secret Newman ever carried. 6 names, 6 secrets, 6 shadows Paul Newman carried to his grave. Some were storms of betrayal, some were fires of obsession. Some were tender sorrows too fragile to exist in daylight. And together, they formed a story Hollywood could never print. A story written on film reels, but on the hidden pages of a man's life. To the world, Newman was flawless, the perfect husband, the untouchable star. But behind the mask of Hollywood's golden boy was a truth as old as time. Even legends are human. They bleed, they break. They long for things they can never have. And in Newman's time, longing like his was not just forbidden, it was dangerous. The golden age of Hollywood was built on illusion, a factory of dreams where studios controlled not just contracts and careers, but lives. Spotlights blinded as much as they lit. Smiles were rehearsed as carefully as lines. Magazines printed stories sculpted by publicists. And behind it all, there was one unspoken rule. Men could not love men. Not if they wanted to keep their fame, their families, or their futures. That is what makes these whispers so haunting. They are not simply rumors about one actor's secret life. They are reflections of an entire generation forced to live in silence. Men who shared glances instead of confessions, letters instead of promises, love stories that could only exist in the margins, erased before they could ever be read aloud. For Newman, the cost of silence was immense. To audiences, he gave performances of brilliance, honesty, and depth. But off-screen, he carried a weight he could never share. Imagine the agony of being celebrated as America's perfect husband, while your heart beat to rhythms you could not admit. Imagine writing love letters you could never send, sharing embraces you could never acknowledge, mourning losses you could never name. This was the reality for countless stars of his era. Newman was not alone. Behind the polished images of Hollywood's golden age were countless stories just like his. Stories of survival, of hiding, of building perfect facades while shadows grew darker beneath. And maybe that is why his hidden confessions, whether real or legend, endure today. Because they remind us that even in a world built on perfection, it is imperfection that makes us human. Even in the brightest light, there are shadows. And even in the silence of fear, love still tried to find its way. Perhaps Newman's greatest legacy is not only in the roles he played, or the millions he gave to charity, or the life he built in the public eye. Perhaps it is also in these whispers. A reminder that those we idolize are no different from us. They fight battles no one sees. They ache for acceptance. They dream of a freedom they may never taste. And maybe, just maybe, his hidden story is not just about him. It is Hollywood's story. A reminder that even in its most glamorous years, the Dream Factory was full of silence, fear, and hearts locked behind closed doors. Almost forgotten, almost erased. But not entirely, because tonight, decades later, we've spoken them aloud. Not as stone-cold fact, but as echoes. Echoes of love, betrayal, longing, and survival. And if there is one truth buried in these echoes, it is this: perfection is an illusion. What truly endures are the struggles we hide, the courage it takes to keep living, and the secrets that, once revealed, show us the humanity behind the legend. Paul Newman's films will live forever. His charities will continue to change lives. But his secret list, whether myth or memory, carries another kind of legacy. A reminder that even icons have shadows. And sometimes, it is the shadows that make the light unforgettable. Behind the smile of a legend lay a truth Hollywood never dared to show. Was Newman's hidden confession fact or myth? The answer may never be clear. But one thing is certain: the shadows of Hollywood are darker than we imagine. Like, share, and subscribe, because the next name on the list is coming. Most people think Zachary Quinto became famous overnight. Sylar in Heroes, Spock in Star Trek, instant stardom. But the truth? Before Hollywood knew his name, he almost disappeared. Years of rejection, doubt that nearly ended his career, one choice that could have erased everything. Instead, that choice turned him into more than a star, an icon who rewrote Hollywood's rules. And to see how, we have to go back, long before the lights, to where his story truly began. He wasn't born into Hollywood lights or red carpets. Zachary Quinto grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in a home that knew both love and loss. His father passed away when Zachary was only 7 years old, leaving his mother to raise 2 sons on her own. That kind of absence, it doesn't just disappear. It shapes you. For many kids, grief like that could be crushing. For Zachary, it became fuel. He found escape in theater. On stage, he could set his own pain aside, step into another life, and for a moment live inside someone else's skin. Theater wasn't just a hobby. It was a lifeline. By high school, people started to notice. He wasn't just another teenager memorizing lines. He transformed. His posture, his voice, his energy, everything shifted when he stepped into character. Teachers pulled him aside, saying, "You've got something rare." He won awards in local competitions. Audiences leaned forward when he performed. Whispers started to spread. This kid's going places. And maybe Zachary felt it too. He was aiming higher than the school auditorium from the very start. That dream carried him to Carnegie Mellon University, one of the most competitive drama programs in the country. If high school had made him stand out, Carnegie Mellon pushed him to blend in, because suddenly everyone around him was talented, ambitious, hungry. It was a pressure cooker. Students broke down, some quit, but Quinto thrived. He sharpened his instincts, he built stamina. He learned that in an industry where 1,000 doors slam shut before one cracks open, you keep knocking anyway. Then came Los Angeles. Graduation didn't deliver a Hollywood contract. It delivered rejection. Casting calls where he blended into a sea of actors who looked just like him. Days spent waiting in crowded rooms only to be dismissed in 30 seconds. The roles he did get, they were forgettable. A nameless agent leaning against a wall, a background student with 2 lines, a tech guy who pops up just long enough to mutter, "The system's down," before the camera moves on. Roles so small, your mom has to pause the DVR and yell, "That's him, rewind, rewind." But Quinto never saw them as meaningless. Each set was a classroom. He studied how the veterans worked. He watched the directors. He treated every fleeting moment as practice, not punishment. He wasn't just waiting for a break, he was preparing for one. And in 2006, that break finally came. NBC launched Heroes. The timing was perfect. The world was obsessed with superheroes, but Heroes wasn't about spandex and capes. It was darker, edgier. A story of ordinary people discovering extraordinary abilities. And hidden inside that story was a character named Sylar. On paper, Sylar wasn't meant to be much, just a shadowy villain, a side note. But the moment Zachary Quinto stepped into the role, everything changed. His Sylar wasn't loud or cartoonish. He was still, calculating, dangerous in a way that made you lean closer to the screen even as your stomach knotted. One moment, he looked almost vulnerable, like maybe you understood him. The next, he snapped, unleashing violence so sudden it left viewers stunned. He wasn't just playing evil. He was redefining what a TV villain could be. Audiences were hooked. Critics praised the nuance. Writers tore up scripts just to expand his part. Before long, Sylar wasn't just a name in the credits. He was the pulse of the show. Entire story arcs bent around him. Fans filled online forums debating his motives. Monday mornings in offices and classrooms sounded the same everywhere. "Did you see what Sylar did last night?" And just like that, the kid from Pittsburgh, the boy who once disappeared into background scenes, was now the face people feared most on television. For Zachary Quinto, this wasn't just a role. It was a transformation. The world finally saw what he'd been preparing for all along, and Hollywood, for the first time, couldn't look away. After Heroes, Zachary Quinto wasn't just another TV actor. He was Sylar, the villain people couldn't stop talking about. But Hollywood has a short memory. One breakout role can make you a star overnight, and it can also make you yesterday's news just as fast. The industry is full of actors who burned bright for a season and then vanished. The question hanging over Quinto was simple. What comes next? The answer arrived in 2009, and it came with pointed ears. J.J. Abrams had announced he was rebooting Star Trek, one of the most beloved franchises in science fiction. The task was enormous: revive a cultural institution, satisfy the die-hard fans, and attract a brand new audience who had never seen Kirk, Spock, or the USS Enterprise. When Zachary Quinto was cast as Spock, the reactions were immediate. Some fans were cautiously hopeful, others were flat-out skeptical, and many were fiercely protective. Because Spock wasn't just a character, Spock was Leonard Nimoy. For more than 40 years, Nimoy's Spock had been more than a Vulcan science officer. He was logic, discipline, restraint. He was the bridge between alien and human. The ultimate outsider who showed audiences that being different could also mean being powerful. To fans, Spock was sacred. And now here came Zachary Quinto, the guy who played a serial-killing villain on Heroes, about to inherit that legacy. The pressure was unlike anything he had faced. He poured himself into preparation. He studied Nimoy's cadence, his posture, the way he could say everything with just a single lifted eyebrow. But Quinto wasn't trying to mimic. He wanted to honor the original and still create a Spock who belonged to this generation. When the film premiered in 2009, all those doubts melted away. Quinto's Spock was sharp, controlled, endlessly logical, everything Nimoy's Spock had been. But there was more. Beneath the calm, he revealed conflict and vulnerability. A man divided, torn between Vulcan discipline and human emotion. That depth gave the character a new edge, and it gave audiences a reason to connect in ways they hadn't before. The movie itself was a triumph, nearly $400 million worldwide, a franchise revived, a new generation hooked. And for Zachary Quinto, it was life-changing. Overnight, he wasn't just Sylar anymore. He wasn't just a TV actor, he was Spock. And being Spock meant global recognition. His face was on billboards, in magazines, at conventions filled with fans dressed as Vulcans and Klingons. He had crossed over from cult TV fame to international stardom. The sequels only cemented that status. In Star Trek Into Darkness 2013, Quinto's Spock wrestled with darker choices, clashing with Benedict Cumberbatch's villain in scenes fans still replay. By Star Trek Beyond 2016, his Spock had matured, no longer just inheriting a legend, but fully embodying it. By then, no one questioned if Quinto belonged. He was Spock. And behind the camera, something even more meaningful was unfolding. Leonard Nimoy didn't just step aside. He stepped in. He embraced Quinto, mentored him, befriended him. Their bond became deeply personal, a mentor, a father figure, a friend. Quinto later admitted, having Nimoy's blessing gave him the courage to play the role without fear. To know that the man who defined Spock for decades trusted him, that was priceless. For audiences, seeing both Spocks, old and new, on screen together was unforgettable. It wasn't just casting. It was symbolic. The past and the future, side by side, the torch being passed. Those years transformed Zachary Quinto. He had gone from a kid hustling for background roles to carrying one of cinema's most iconic characters. He had the critics' respect, the fans' love, and Leonard Nimoy's trust. But success on screen was only part of the story. Because while Quinto was playing an alien forever, torn between two worlds, in real life, he was preparing to reveal a truth of his own. One that would take just as much courage as stepping into Spock's shoes. In 2011, Zachary Quinto came out publicly as gay. Not with a red carpet announcement, not through a glossy magazine cover, not with a carefully staged Hollywood exclusive. He did it quietly, in a blog post on his website. Simple, personal, honest. The timing was powerful. Just weeks earlier, the suicide of 14-year-old Jamie Rodemeyer had shaken the country. Bullied relentlessly for being gay, Jamie's death was a reminder of how silence can cost lives. Quinto read the story and felt it like a punch to the chest. He wrote that he couldn't stay quiet anymore. Silence, he said, felt like complicity. Those closest to him weren't shocked. Family, friends, many colleagues already knew. But to the millions who only saw him as Sylar or Spock, this was a revelation. And in 2011, choosing to live openly was still a decision loaded with risk. America was split. Same-sex marriage existed in only a handful of states. Don't ask, don't tell had just been repealed. Polls showed opinion slowly shifting, but not enough to guarantee safety. Hollywood, despite its liberal face, still sent quiet warnings to actors. Don't make yourself uncastable. Don't close doors before they open. Don't give studios a reason to hesitate. Quinto had heard all of it. He knew how quickly careers could shrink, but he also knew the weight of silence. So he pressed publish. In that single act, he reframed how the world saw him, not just a performer, but a man stepping forward with truth. The reaction was swift. Headlines circled the globe. Social media filled with support. LGBTQ organizations praised the decision, and countless fans expressed relief and gratitude. What struck most people wasn't simply that another celebrity had come out, it was who. This was Spock, the face of a billion-dollar franchise, tied to characters defined by strength, logic, and difference, saying openly, "This is who I am." To young queer fans, it meant visibility and hope. Proof that even in Hollywood, where image is everything, honesty was possible. What made the moment even more powerful was what Quinto chose to do afterward. He didn't treat his announcement as the end of the conversation. He leaned into it, speaking about bullying, suicide prevention, the responsibility that comes with visibility. His interviews weren't rehearsed speeches. They were candid, thoughtful, sometimes emotional. He wasn't positioning himself as a spokesperson. He was simply refusing to be silent. Hollywood noticed. So did fans. His authenticity resonated because it wasn't branding, it was lived experience. That sincerity gave every word weight. Questions still lingered. Would audiences accept him as a romantic lead? Would studios hesitate to cast him in blockbusters? These concerns were real. But Quinto kept working, and the collapse never came. If anything, his career grew steadier, his presence more commanding. Without the burden of hiding, he had more energy to give to his craft, and it showed. The change was liberating. No more dodging questions in interviews. No more cautious half-answers about dating. No more second-guessing before stepping onto a red carpet. He could just live. And that freedom translated into a presence that felt stronger, lighter, more assured. Audiences saw it too. He wasn't only Sylar, the chilling villain. He wasn't only Spock, the Vulcan torn between two worlds. He was Zachary Quinto, the man who used his voice when it mattered, who proved that honesty could be as powerful as any role. That year was a turning point. He became more than an actor. He became a symbol. Proof that courage doesn't just belong to fictional heroes. It belongs to those willing to tell the truth, no matter the risk. And while his coming out was deeply personal, its ripple effect stretched far beyond Hollywood. It gave strength to people he would never meet and added his voice to a movement still fighting for recognition and equality. For Zachary Quinto, choosing honesty wasn't the end of his story. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where the man and the advocate could no longer be separated. Because now, Hollywood didn't just see a star. The world was starting to see something bigger. A voice, steady and unflinching, for a generation still waiting to be heard. But even as his public role grew, Quinto never allowed it to overshadow the work itself. If anything, the years after his coming out became some of the most prolific of his career. Years that showed he could move fluidly between television, film, and theater, refusing to be defined by any single character or label. In 2011, he stepped into American Horror Story, Ryan Murphy's twisted anthology that quickly became a cultural phenomenon. First came Murder House, where Quinto played Chad Warwick, a man whose death left him bitter, haunted, and sardonic. It was a small role, but memorably unsettling. His sharp edges and wounded energy added layers of tension to the show's already dark atmosphere. Audiences who had just seen him as Spock were now watching him unravel as a ghost trapped in resentment. The contrast was startling, and that was exactly the point. Then came Asylum, 2012, where Quinto went even further. Cast as Dr. Oliver Thredson, he began the season as a seemingly kind, rational psychiatrist, a figure of order in a chaotic institution. But as the story unfolded, that polished exterior cracked, revealing a sadistic killer. His calm precision made the reveal all the more terrifying. One moment he appeared gentle, even sympathetic. The next, he was chillingly methodical. Critics praised his ability to balance empathy with menace, and fans still rank Thredson among the show's most unforgettable villains. By 2013, Quinto had proven once again that he could shift from sympathetic to sinister with unnerving ease. Film offered a different test. In Margin Call, 2011, a tightly wound drama about the 2008 financial crisis, he played Peter Sullivan, the young analyst whose discovery sets off the chain of panic inside an investment firm. Surrounded by heavyweights like Kevin Spacey, Stanley Tucci, and Jeremy Irons, Quinto didn't fade into the background. He anchored the story. His performance gave the film its moral spine, and critics noticed. The movie earned an Oscar nomination, while Quinto earned recognition as an actor capable of standing toe-to-toe with the industry's most seasoned talents. For an actor often associated with genre work, it was proof he belonged in serious, character-driven drama. Years later, Oliver Stone's Snowden, 2016, gave him another chance to inhabit a role rooted in reality. Playing journalist Glenn Greenwald, Quinto captured the urgency of a man determined to shine light on secrets governments wanted buried. His restless energy, sharp intensity, and conviction reminded audiences that truth often depends on those willing to confront power directly. Again, he wasn't chasing visibility for its own sake. He was choosing stories that carried weight beyond the screen. And all the while, he returned to the stage, the place where his journey had begun. Theater offered something no set could replicate: the raw electricity of live performance. In Tony Kushner's Angels in America, he delivered one of his most acclaimed performances, embodying the heartbreak, rage, and resilience at the core of the play's exploration of AIDS and identity. Critics called him fearless, audiences called him unforgettable. For Quinto, it was both art and advocacy, breathing life into a story that had defined an era of queer struggle and survival, while still resonating with new generations. He didn't stop there. In The Best of Enemies, a play centered on political and ideological clashes, Quinto once again showed his range. Whether on Broadway or the West End, he demonstrated an ability to command the stage with the same intensity he brought to the screen. Night after night, he proved that his craft was not just adaptable, it was unshakable, rooted in a discipline that had carried him from high school stages to the world's most respected theaters. By the middle of the decade, the picture was clear. Zachary Quinto was not Sylar anymore. He was not only Spock. He wasn't boxed in by typecasting or by fears that being openly gay would cost him opportunities. Instead, he was building a career defined by choice, depth, and integrity. And with every project, he sent a quiet message. Honesty hadn't limited his art. It had expanded it, giving him the freedom to take risks, to surprise audiences, and to shape a career on his own terms. After years of proving his art could stand on its own, Quinto began to turn that same focus toward something bigger than performance. Fame had given him a stage. The question was, what would he do with it? By the early 2010s, the answer was clear. The platform he built wasn't just for himself, it was for people who didn't yet have one. His first major step came with the Trevor Project, the crisis and suicide prevention hotline for LGBTQ+ youth. Quinto didn't sign on as just another celebrity name. He recorded messages, promoted the hotline, showed up in campaigns, and reminded kids in crisis that no matter how dark it felt, there was a way forward. He often talked about his own adolescence, about loneliness, about searching, and why teenagers needed to hear that their story was only beginning, not ending. Then came the fight for marriage equality. Years before the Supreme Court finally legalized same-sex marriage nationwide in 2015, the battle was bruising. Quinto stood on the front lines, lending his voice at rallies, signing open letters, pushing back against the idea that equality was an abstract concept. For him, it was personal. The right to visit a partner in the hospital, the right to build a family with security, the right to be recognized under the law like anyone else. He stripped the politics down to something simple: dignity. He also threw himself into campaigns around HIV and AIDS awareness. Too often, the epidemic was treated like something that belonged to the past. Quinto insisted it wasn't over. He worked with organizations that promoted testing, prevention, and education. He raised funds. He spoke openly about ending the stigma that still followed the disease. Medicine had made progress, but shame was still killing, and he refused to let the silence return. Public stages became part of his rhythm. At Pride in New York, Los Angeles, and beyond, Quinto delivered speeches that were personal and urgent. Rights, he reminded the crowds, were not permanent. They had to be defended. Younger generations were still at risk of bullying, of rejection, of silence. He didn't speak as a Hollywood star from a pedestal. He spoke as someone who understood what it meant to grow up different, and the effect was electric. That same candor carried on to the stage of the GLAAD Media Awards. These weren't just nights of celebration. They were reminders of the power stories have to shape culture. Quinto challenged Hollywood directly. Representation, he said, wasn't a passing trend. It was survival. A queer character living fully without tragedy could change the way families saw their children. A film that treated identity as human instead of spectacle could reshape classrooms and communities. What set his advocacy apart was persistence. He didn't vanish when the spotlight moved. He supported smaller nonprofits, he visited schools, he used his social media to elevate voices that hadn't been heard. Over time, fans knew. If news broke about LGBTQ+ rights or a young person in crisis, Quinto would say something. Not for a headline, but as a reminder that visibility matters most when it's constant. His image had expanded beyond celebrity. He was still the actor who terrified audiences as Sylar and carried Spock into a new generation. But he had also become a steady presence in the fight for dignity and acceptance. The roles made him visible. The advocacy made him vital. He wasn't just building a career, he was building a legacy that tied art to responsibility. And in the process, Zachary Quinto showed that fame, paired with conviction, could be more than spotlight. It could be shield and beacon at once, protecting those still searching for their voice, and lighting the way for a generation that needed to know it was never alone. By the time his voice had become a fixture in conversations about equality, something deeper was taking shape around Zachary Quinto. He wasn't only a familiar face from blockbusters or acclaimed TV shows. He had become proof that an openly gay actor could thrive in mainstream Hollywood without losing ground. And that shift mattered. For decades, the message to queer performers had been blunt: stay quiet if you want a career. Quinto, by living differently, helped dismantle that idea in real time. What set him apart wasn't just visibility, but the way he carried it. He wasn't loud for the sake of noise or chasing headlines just to stay relevant. Instead, he projected steadiness, a kind of quiet authority. When he spoke, it felt deliberate, grounded, thoughtful. That calmness turned him into a figure people trusted. And for many in the LGBTQ+ community, especially the young, he embodied a model of strength that wasn't about flamboyance or defiance, but something just as radical: being unapologetically himself. In an industry obsessed with image, Quinto became a counter-image, an intellectual, a grounded artist, someone who refused to bend himself into what studios thought a leading man should be. Audiences found him compelling, not in spite of his honesty, but because of it. That made him a cultural bridge, Hollywood on one side, the queer community on the other. Quinto walked between those worlds naturally, proving they didn't have to remain separate. Journalists noticed the shift. Profiles began calling him one of the rare thinking actors of his generation, careful with words, unafraid of hard truths. He wasn't an activist dabbling in acting or an actor dabbling in activism. He was both, seamlessly. That balance gave him staying power. Not a novelty, not a scandal, but a presence people could rely on. Fans noticed too. For queer audiences, his career became a beacon. If Quinto could thrive as himself, maybe their futures weren't as narrow as they feared. For broader audiences, he was proof that honesty doesn't weaken art. It sharpens it. By then, no single role defined him anymore. He had moved beyond Sylar's menace or Spock's logic. What defined him was consistency. By the late 2010s, Hollywood itself was shifting, but his example still stood out. He was one of the few openly gay actors who had not just survived, but flourished in the mainstream. While many were typecast or sidelined, he carried franchises, headlined plays in New York and London, and anchored independent films that earned critical respect. Each success chipped away at the old myth that authenticity and ambition couldn't coexist. Culturally, he became less a celebrity than a symbol. For media, he was shorthand for living openly without losing relevance. For queer youth, reassurance that identity need not be an obstacle. And for Hollywood, proof that audiences don't reject authenticity, they respect it. His influence wasn't built on grand gestures, but on persistence. He didn't reinvent himself with every news cycle. He simply kept showing up, on screen, on stage, in public life, anchored in the same calm truth. That reliability gave him a weight flashier stars often lacked. And in that constancy, Quinto carved out a new archetype. The openly gay A-list actor who didn't need to explain, defend, or soften his truth to fit Hollywood's expectations. He became not just a success story, but a roadmap for other actors, for young people, for anyone told that honesty and ambition couldn't exist together. In the end, Zachary Quinto's influence isn't measured only in box office numbers or awards. It lives in perception, in possibility. He showed that openness doesn't erase opportunity, and that telling the truth about who you are doesn't cost respect. It commands it. And that image, the artist's steady, unflinching, and real, remains one of his greatest roles. Not a performance for cameras, but a life lived as proof that courage and success can walk hand in hand. After years of carving out his place in Hollywood, Quinto shows no signs of slowing down. His recent projects prove he isn't interested in coasting on past achievements. He's still experimenting, still finding new ways to stretch both his craft and the industry that once doubted him. In the early 2020s, more than 15 years after Sylar first chilled audiences on Heroes, he had moved into a new phase. The veteran who still feels restless. Independent cinema gave him that space. In 2023, he starred in Down Low, a dark comedy that premiered at SSW. Small in scale but bold in tone, quirky, twisted, unapologetically strange. Quinto leaned into the weirdness, earning praise for a fearless performance. It wasn't meant to dominate box offices, it was meant to prove he could take risks and make them worth watching. Later that same year came He Went That Way at Tribeca. Inspired by true events, it paired him with Jacob Elordi in a tense story of survival on the open road. Where Down Low reveled in offbeat humor, He Went That Way simmered with unease, showcasing his ability to shift tones without losing the core of his craft. These weren't blockbusters, but that was the point. He didn't need a massive budget to make an impact anymore. What mattered was the chance to play, to take parts that felt alive. Independent films reminded him why he had started acting in the first place. Stories sharp enough to cut, characters jagged enough to linger. Meanwhile, the stage kept calling. In 2023, he returned to Broadway with The Cult of Love, a play about family dynamics and the ties that both hold and tear us apart. Critics praised his layered performance, noting how he slipped from sharp humor to aching vulnerability within a single scene. On stage, without edits or retakes, his precision had nowhere to hide, and didn't need to. Night after night, audiences saw an actor still thriving where it had all begun. Television, though, offered the clearest proof of his staying power. In 2024, NBC announced Brilliant Minds, a medical drama inspired by the life and work of Dr. Oliver Sacks. Quinto was cast as the lead, stepping into the role of a neurologist whose empathy and intellect guide him through extraordinary cases. It marked his first major network TV lead since Heroes, and critics quickly noted how fitting it felt. A series about compassion and the mysteries of identity, anchored by an actor long drawn to characters caught between logic and emotion. For Quinto, Brilliant Minds was more than another credit. It was proof of resilience, evidence that network television still saw him as a bankable star nearly 2 decades into his career. And symbolically, it felt almost poetic. After years of embodying villains and outsiders, here he was playing a healer. Together, these projects form a mosaic of where he stands now. Independent films that let him explore the edges, theater that strips everything back to raw skill, network television that reintroduces him to millions. Each lane different, but all pointing to the same truth. Quinto's career hasn't narrowed with time, it has widened. That breadth is the real story. Too many actors fade once the lightning strike of fame dims. Others cling desperately to a single role. Quinto avoided both traps. By 2025, he stands as a reminder that endurance in Hollywood isn't about constant reinvention. It's about trusting your voice and refusing to let the industry's old rules dictate your choices. 15 years after he first broke through, Zachary Quinto is still here, on screen, on stage, in the cultural conversation. Not a relic of the late 2000s, not an actor defined by one franchise, a figure whose relevance stretches across genres and decades. And with each new project, he reinforces the message his whole career has carried, that honesty, persistence, and craft can build not just stardom, but staying power. Looking back from this moment, Quinto's story reads less like a career trajectory and more like a blueprint. From the kid in Pittsburgh chasing roles that barely had names, to Siler, to Spock, to Broadway stages, to independent cinema, and back to network television, his path shows how persistence and honesty can outlast trends. But the real legacy isn't just the credits, it's the proof he left behind, that living openly, fully, unapologetically does not close doors. It can, in fact, open them wider. For years, the entertainment industry whispered the same warning to queer performers: hide your truth if you want to succeed. Quinto defied that rule in real time. He came out when studios still hesitated to back openly gay actors, then carried blockbusters, won critical acclaim, and kept returning to the work that mattered most. The message was impossible to ignore. Authenticity and ambition weren't opposites. They could coexist, and his career became living evidence. What makes his influence lasting is that it goes beyond headlines. He didn't build his image on shock or reinvention. He built it on steadiness, on showing up consistently, on screen and off as himself. That reliability gave weight to his words and shape to his example. For queer youth, it was more than encouragement. It was representation. They could point to a mainstream star and say, "He's like me and he's thriving." That recognition carries a power no award can match. At the same time, his career dismantled stereotypes from inside the machine. He wasn't typecast into caricature or sidelined into niche roles. He played villains and heroes, icons and ordinary men, voices of reason and embodiments of chaos. Each role chipped away at the notion that sexuality dictates what an actor can believably portray. He proved that talent, not labels, is what makes a performance resonate. Culturally, that duality, artist and advocate, became his hallmark. On one side, the Hollywood star with global visibility. On the other, the activist who lent his platform to causes larger than himself. Neither role diluted the other. Instead, they reinforced one another, showing that an actor could be both celebrated and socially engaged without compromise. That balance helped normalize a future where representation in Hollywood wasn't treated as exception, but expectation. His presence shifted not only how audiences saw him, but how they saw themselves. Fans who once felt invisible found validation in his success. Industry peers saw that the old myths about marketability were just that, myths. And even for those outside the LGBTQ+ community, his story modeled a different kind of success. One built not on hiding or reshaping identity, but on embracing it fully. His legacy is already secure, not because of a single performance, but because of the accumulation, the consistency of showing up, the courage of honesty, the craft that tied everything together. His name has become shorthand for something bigger than stardom. Resilience, representation, and the reminder that truth doesn't diminish art. It deepens it. For young actors coming up, his career is a roadmap. For audiences, his work is a touchstone. And for the LGBTQ+ community, his life remains a signal fire. Proof that visibility can inspire, that courage can ripple outward, that authenticity can thrive in the very spaces once thought closed to it. That is the descent Zachary Quinto carries forward. Not just the characters he brought to life, or the awards and acclaim he collected along the way, but the knowledge he gave to countless others. That living openly doesn't mean giving up your place in the world. Sometimes it means claiming it more fully than ever. And in that, Quinto has already delivered his most enduring role. Not one written in a script, but one lived day by day. The role of an artist who showed that honesty and success don't cancel each other out. They walk together, hand in hand. Zachary Quinto's journey reminds us that truth and art can walk side by side, and that living authentically is not the end of opportunity, but the beginning of something greater. His life proves that courage leaves a legacy far deeper than fame. In celebrating Quinto, we're also celebrating the possibility within ourselves to do the same. If his story moved you, let us know in the comments. Hit like to support the channel, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories of artists who challenge Hollywood and inspire us to live more honestly ourselves. A forbidden secret that could destroy it all. Hollywood once hailed him as the golden boy, the blonde-haired, blue-eyed dream boy that every girl wanted. On screen, Tab Hunter was perfection. But beneath the surface was a secret list of forbidden relationships that Hollywood spent decades trying to erase. These weren't the romances staged in glossy magazines. These were the men he secretly loved, the betrayals that scarred him, and the scandals that nearly ruined it all. Hollywood in the 1950s was a kingdom of light, but its brilliance was built on shadows. And no star carried a darker, heavier shadow than Tab Hunter. To the outside world, he looked untouchable. Golden hair blazing under the California sun, blue eyes that made teenage girls lose their breath, and a smile so flawless it seemed sculpted by the studios themselves. Practically overnight, Warner Brothers turned him into America's dream boy. His face filled the pages of fan magazines, his name echoed on radios and movie screens, and his very presence was adored like a statue carved for worship. But that statue was hollow. Behind the carefully polished grin lived a truth so fragile, so forbidden, it could have destroyed everything. Tab Hunter carried a secret that no studio, no priest, no newspaper would ever forgive. He lived each day as if holding a ticking bomb, knowing one careless whisper could ruin his career, strip him of his freedom, and erase him from the very dream factory that had created him. The rules were merciless, written in stone. A leading man had to be seen with glamorous women, his romances orchestrated, his kisses staged, his headlines carefully planted like lines in a script. Tab played his part without flaw, escorting Natalie Wood, smiling beside Debbie Reynolds. But none of it was real. He wasn't living his own life. He was performing a role long after the cameras stopped rolling. And the cost of slipping was terrifying. If the truth came out, the punishment would be swift and brutal. Studios would sever ties in an instant. Fan clubs would collapse in shame. Newspapers would print his name in bold, branding him a disgrace. The FBI was already storming private gatherings, dragging men into the glare of police lights as tabloids circled like vultures. For Tab, a single night in the wrong company, a single careless step, could end not just his career, but his life as he knew it. So he lived on edge every day. Every handshake had to be measured, every smile rehearsed, every word weighed before it left his lips. Applause thundered around him, but inside he sat in silence. Millions adored Tab Hunter, yet he could trust almost no one. Even so-called friends could turn into threats. In Hollywood, betrayal wasn't rare, it was currency. And a secret like his was more valuable than gold. Still, away from the flashbulbs, Tab was only human. He longed for what the studios could never stage. Love that was genuine. A hand he could hold without fear. A voice that whispered his name and meant it. But stepping toward that hidden world was like crossing a tightrope over a pit. A glance held too long. A phone call answered at the wrong moment. A meeting at the wrong address. Any misstep could spark a scandal that devoured him whole. And yet, he could not resist. He followed what his heart demanded, even when it meant risking everything. Some encounters gave him fleeting happiness, brief but real. Others turned into romances that had to be hidden like forbidden treasures. And a few ended in betrayals so sharp, the wounds never fully healed. These were the chapters that fan magazines never dared to print. The hidden bonds erased from official records. The scandals reduced to whispers that never reached the headlines. To understand Tab Hunter, you cannot stop at the glossy posters or the staged smiles. You must step into the corridors he kept hidden, a world of forbidden affection, hushed promises, and secrets too dangerous to speak aloud. And it was there, in the silence of that double life, that Tab Hunter's true story began. The first name ever whispered in connection to Tab Hunter was one almost no one saw coming: Ronnie Robertson. To the world, Ronnie was dazzling, a prodigy on the ice who spun so fast people swore he might disappear into thin air. He was America's boy wonder, Olympic glory within reach, a golden star in his own right. But in the shadows of Hollywood, his life collided with Tab's. And from that moment, both men carried a secret that could never be seen in daylight. How it started is still debated. Some say Tab first spotted Ronnie at a private Hollywood party, the kind where champagne flowed and the press was carefully locked outside. Others insist they were introduced by men who lived in the same hidden world. Men who smiled on red carpets but lived in fear once the lights went out. However it began, Ronnie slipped into Tab's orbit. Young, fearless, untamed. Not a studio invention, not a polished leading man, but real. And that made him dangerously irresistible. For Tab, Ronnie became an escape. With him, the mask fell away. He could laugh without worrying how it looked in photos. He could speak without rehearsing every word. He could touch without pretending it was for the camera. But freedom always came with fear. Imagine two golden boys seen together too often. The risk was enormous. One wrong look, one careless hand, a single photograph left undeveloped in the wrong darkroom, and the dream would shatter overnight. There are whispers of close calls. A studio driver once claimed he saw a figure slipping out Tab's back door well past midnight. Small, wiry, moving fast, like a skater escaping the spotlight. Another rumor placed Ronnie in the Hollywood Hills after dark, his car hidden far down the road, headlights off, waiting for the street to clear before vanishing into Tab's apartment. Some even say the police raided a party one night where both men were present, and though no names were printed, Tab left shaken, convinced that one slip could put his career in handcuffs. None of it was ever proven. But the whispers didn't stop. And in Hollywood, whispers were often more dangerous than facts. Some say Tab quietly helped Ronnie's career, slipping him money for training, covering travel when competitions demanded more than he could afford. Others insist the romance was uneven, Ronnie bold and restless pushing against the limits, while Tab, terrified of exposure, kept pulling back. Which version is true? No one knows. What remains is tension, uncertainty, and the gnawing suspicion that someone, somewhere betrayed them. And betrayal is where the story turns. Did a so-called friend whisper their secret into the wrong ear? Did jealousy from rivals tear open cracks that could never be repaired? Or did Ronnie himself, impulsive and proud, push too far into a world that wasn't ready for them? The truth is murky, blurred by fear, buried under silence. Even Tab admitted years later it was impossible in those days to separate real love from sheer paranoia. What is certain is this: Ronnie Robertson left a mark that never faded. He wasn't just another hidden name. He was the first flame, the boy who gave Tab a glimpse of happiness and the man who taught him how dangerous that happiness could be. Their story burned bright, then vanished like a trace on ice, gone in an instant, leaving only the memory. Ronnie's name never appeared beside Tab's in glossy magazines. The studio machine made sure of that. But in smoky whispers, in back rooms and late-night conversations, his shadow lingered. The boy who spun faster than anyone alive, and the secret that haunted Tab Hunter long after the applause had died away. There's a story Hollywood insiders still whisper about. One night in the late 1950s, a photographer swore he had the shot of a lifetime. Anthony Perkins slipping into Tab Hunter's driveway after midnight. By morning, the negatives were gone, bought off or buried. The proof vanished, but the rumor lived on. Because if Ronnie Robertson was Tab's first spark, Anthony Perkins was the love that set his world on fire. Perkins was already becoming a sensation. Tall, dark-haired, with that restless charm that made him look both fragile and dangerous at the same time. Paramount saw him as the next great leading man, and later he would terrify the world as Norman Bates in Psycho. But behind that rising career was a secret that tied him to Tab Hunter in ways few ever suspected. Their romance didn't unfold in the open. It hid in shadows, in the balcony of the Chateau Marmont, where some say they first slipped away from a crowded party, in the dark corners of Los Angeles theaters, where they arrived separately and sat together only after the lights dimmed. For a time, they even lived close enough to walk between each other's houses under cover of night. It was love, but it was love on borrowed time. Hollywood's rules were merciless. Warner expected Tab to be seen with Natalie Wood. Paramount needed Perkins to appear straight, pairing him with ingenues in gossip columns. Every kiss, every headline, every photograph was staged to sell the illusion. And so Tab and Perkins became masters of secrecy. They walked on eggshells, every glance rehearsed, every move calculated. But secrecy corrodes. Friends noticed the tension. Some claimed Perkins, hungry for stardom, started to pull back when he realized the risks. Others whispered that powerful figures in Hollywood pushed him away from Tab, warning that being seen with another man could destroy everything. There were even darker rumors that Perkins, whether out of fear or ambition, let their secret slip to the wrong ears. Nothing was ever proven, but the possibility hung over Tab like a shadow. And then there were the close calls. A nosy neighbor once told friends she saw Perkins slipping through Tab's garden gate at dawn. A reporter claimed to have overheard the two arguing in a quiet cafe off Sunset, voices hushed but unmistakable. These stories were never confirmed, yet they spread like wildfire in back rooms, feeding Hollywood's appetite for secrets it couldn't print. For Tab, Perkins was more than a lover. He was the mirror of his own struggle, a man caught between passion and paranoia, between desire and survival. Together they found moments of joy, but those moments were poisoned by fear. The romance that should have been liberating instead became a reminder of how tightly Hollywood's chains could bind. Years later, Tab admitted the relationship shaped him more than any other. Perkins went on to carve his name into film history with Psycho. Tab, meanwhile, carried the memory, the stolen glances, the secret visits, the love that might have been if the world had been different. Anthony Perkins wasn't just another hidden chapter. He was the turning point, the one who showed Tab Hunter how intoxicating love could be, and how devastating it was when love had to live in the shadows. If Anthony Perkins was the love that consumed him, then Roddy McDowall was the shadow that never left his side. Roddy wasn't just another familiar face in Hollywood. He was sharp, witty, always in the right rooms, and trusted in ways very few people ever were. For Tab, that trust was priceless. While Perkins came and went like a storm, Roddy was steady, always nearby, always watching. Too steady, some thought. Was it friendship, loyalty, or something more complicated, wrapped in silence? Their closeness was undeniable. They were spotted sharing late dinners long after the city had gone quiet, slipping out through side doors when the waitstaff looked away. They vanished on weekend trips that were never mentioned in the press. At parties, Roddy had a habit of letting his hand linger on Tab's shoulder, casual enough to pass as friendly, yet just long enough to spark whispers. Then came the photographs. Only a handful exist today, hidden in private collections. One shows them poolside, leaning close, laughing like two men who had forgotten the world outside. Another captures them at a gathering, heads bent together as though sharing a secret no one else could hear. They never crossed the line in front of a camera. They were too careful for that. But the body language told another story, one the studios would have buried at any cost. When the confidential scandal threatened to end Tab's career, it was Roddy who stepped in. He knew the lawyers who could make files vanish, the insiders who could be paid to hold their tongues. He led Tab into private circles where actors and directors lived the same way, bound by silence, connected by fear. For a few hours, behind closed doors, Tab could breathe. But protection like that always comes with a cost. Roddy knew everything. Every name whispered in secrecy, every place Tab risked letting the masks slip, every rumor that could have turned into a headline. Knowledge like that was dangerous and powerful. Did Roddy use it to his advantage? Did their closeness blur into something Tab couldn't control? No one can say for sure. But in a city where secrets were currency, their bond was worth more than gold. There were close calls that fueled the speculation. One story told of a studio photographer arriving unannounced at Tab's house, only to notice a car hidden discreetly down the street. Another claimed they left a dinner party through the back alley just minutes before the front door exploded with flashbulbs. Nothing made the papers. But in Hollywood, the whispers were often more lethal than the headlines. Unlike Perkins, whose absence cut deep, Roddy was always there. He was the voice on the phone when the weight of the world grew too heavy. The quiet figure at the edge of a room, cigarette in hand, watching as Tab tried to laugh with the crowd. Not always in the spotlight, but always close enough to matter. A shadow that followed him everywhere. And that was the mystery. Was Roddy a friend? A protector? A lover hidden in plain sight? Or perhaps all three at once? To some, he was the one man who never betrayed Tab. To others, he was the keeper of secrets too dark to ever be named aloud. Roddy McDowall was not the blaze of a headline romance. He was the silence that endured, a constant presence, a shadow that never faded. And like all shadows, his true shape was impossible to capture. The world is left only to wonder what really passed between them, and what was buried forever in the silence they shared. Before Warner Brothers polished his smile and sold him as America's dream boy, Tab Hunter already belonged to one man, Dick Clayton. On paper, he was just an agent. In reality, he was something far more. The man who discovered him, molded him, and, according to whispers, kept him closer than anyone else dared. Clayton had once been a struggling actor, a face audiences forgot, before he reinvented himself as the man behind the curtain. That gave him an edge. He knew the hunger of auditions, the sting of rejection. When he met Tab, still an awkward blonde kid answering to Arthur Jelian, Clayton didn't just see potential. He saw someone he wanted to shape, protect, and perhaps claim for himself. He became Tab's architect. He arranged the photo shoots, the auditions, the fake dates with young actresses. But the arrangement went beyond business. Clayton was everywhere. The late-night phone calls that stretched until dawn. The car parked discreetly outside Tab's home at hours no agent should be visiting. Neighbors whispered about Clayton staying overnight. Assistants joked, carefully, that the two spent more time together behind locked doors than Tab ever did with his supposed girlfriends. There were incidents that painted the picture more vividly. A studio photographer once dropped by Tab's house unannounced, only to find Clayton's jacket tossed over a chair. Tab flustered, both men emerging from the back room moments later with stiff smiles. At a Hollywood party, guests remembered Tab leaning against a wall, exhausted, only for Clayton to slip an arm around his waist, guiding him out as though the rest of the room had vanished. It looked protective, but the intimacy was impossible to ignore. And then there was the rumored photograph. Whispers claim a roll of film nearly made its way to the tabloids. Tab and Clayton, poolside, seated close, heads bent together, eyes locked in a way no publicist could spin as business. Clayton allegedly paid dearly to make the negatives disappear. The story was never proven, but in Hollywood, the absence of proof often spoke louder than facts. When danger struck, it was Clayton who moved like a fixer. During the Confidential magazine scandal, when Tab's name was about to be splashed across the front page, Clayton pulled strings, leaned on lawyers, and made sure the worst never saw daylight. To the world, he was the loyal agent saving his client. To those who looked closer, it was something more. A man protecting both their lives from being exposed. That was the paradox. Clayton gave Tab safety, but also control. He knew every name, every secret meeting, every risk. Some insiders swore Clayton ended Tab's budding romance with another actor, dismissing it as bad for business. Others whispered it was jealousy, a warning that no one would come between them. To the public, Dick Clayton was just the agent, the man behind the deals. But to Tab, He was savior and captor in one. The man who built him, shielded him, and perhaps loved him in ways that could never be spoken aloud. Their bond wasn't the blaze of a public romance. It was a private fire, hidden behind curtains, sustained by secrecy, and haunted by the knowledge that discovery would destroy them both. And that's what makes his role so haunting. Dick Clayton wasn't simply the man who built Tab Hunter's career. He may have held the part of him the world was never meant to see. Roddy McDowall shielded him. Dick Clayton fought to protect him. But if Tab Hunter had guardians in the shadows, then who set the trap that nearly destroyed him? The name was Henry Wilson, Hollywood's most feared agent. To the world, he was the kingmaker who discovered Rock Hudson, Troy Donahue, Guy Madison, men whose faces defined a generation. But in the industry, everyone knew his other reputation. He collected beautiful young actors like trophies, and he kept their secrets locked away, pulling them out only when it served him. With Henry, nothing came free. Tab was never officially one of Wilson's boys, but that didn't keep Henry from circling close. At private parties, he would lean in too near, whispering into Tab's ear as if sharing some joke no one else could hear. He introduced Tab to hidden circles, men who lived behind masks, men who carried the same fears. Sometimes, after those dinners stretched past midnight, the guests would be dismissed, one by one, until only Tab remained. No one knew exactly what happened in those rooms once the doors shut, but whispers said Tab often left looking tense, collar pulled high, eyes lowered. There were stories of notes passed quietly, scrawled on scraps of paper. "See me after rehearsal. Don't be seen with him again." One assistant swore those messages carried both promises and warnings. Another claimed Wilson once sent Tab a gold watch, his initials engraved inside, a gift so extravagant it raised eyebrows. Tab rarely wore it, and after the scandal broke, the watch disappeared entirely, never seen again. Henry had a way of mixing affection with menace. At public events, he'd step forward to adjust Tab's tie or brush imaginary lint from his jacket, gestures that looked fatherly to outsiders but felt far too intimate to those who noticed the glint in his eyes. And then there was the line he was overheard saying one night, with a smile that chilled, "You know the secrets I've kept for you. Don't make me use them." What mattered was that Wilson knew everything. He knew where Tab slipped away after dark. He knew the names of the men Tab trusted most. He knew the fragile places in his life that could not withstand exposure. And in Henry's hands, knowledge was never safe. When Confidential magazine threatened to expose Rock Hudson, Henry struck a bargain. Rock would be spared. Tab would take the fall. Overnight, the whispers hardened into headlines, and Tab's carefully manufactured image collapsed. To the world, it was just another scandal. To Tab, it was betrayal by a man who had stood too close, who had brushed his shoulder at parties and whispered promises behind closed doors. That was Henry Wilson's cruelty. For Roddy and Clayton, closeness meant protection. For Henry, closeness meant possession, and possession always came with a price. In the end, Henry Wilson wasn't remembered as Tab's lover or his ally. He was remembered as the man who blurred the line between desire and control, who turned intimacy into leverage, and who proved that in Hollywood, even your most private secrets could be traded like currency. After the storm with Henry Wilson, Tab Hunter longed for quiet. And for a brief time, he thought he had found it. That quiet came in the form of John. Not a star, not a studio invention, but a man who slipped into his life like an anchor. To the outside world, John was introduced as Tab's secretary, a companion who managed calls, booked travel, kept his calendar neat. But behind closed doors, it was something closer to love. In Virginia, far from the flashbulbs, they built a life that looked almost ordinary. Neighbors whispered about the two men grocery shopping together, walking the dog, cooking dinner in their small home. They were careful, but not invisible. For Tab, it must have felt like a stolen miracle. Evenings by the fireplace, laughter without cameras, letters passed across the breakfast table filled with words he could never speak in public. But peace for Tab never lasted. Those letters, playful, intimate confessions written in his own hand, became the fault line. One night, after weeks of tension, they erupted into a fight. Voices carried through thin walls. A door slammed, and soon after, whispers began. Assistants muttered about envelopes John kept hidden in his desk. Friends claimed they saw him wave a stack of folded pages like a weapon during an argument. The love notes, once tokens of affection, had turned into leverage. The threat was simple: pay or risk exposure. It was more than a bluff. One rumor tells of a journalist who received an anonymous call promising evidence that Hollywood's golden boy was living a double life. Another story claims that a studio publicist intercepted a manila envelope before it ever reached a tabloid office. Inside, a single letter in Tab's handwriting, tender but damning. The package vanished, destroyed before it could surface. But the message was clear. Tab's secret was hanging by a thread, and this time it was someone inside his home pulling at it. The relationship collapsed under the weight of that betrayal. John disappeared from Tab's life, but the damage lingered. It wasn't just heartbreak. It was the cruel reminder that even love, the rarest thing in his world, could be twisted into a weapon. And so Tab retreated again, guarded and scarred, convinced that every time he reached for closeness, it would end in exposure. But fate hadn't finished with him yet. Because after all the shadows, the betrayals, and the scandals, there would come one man who refused to hide, one man who stood by him until the very end. That man was Allan Glaser. At first, it didn't look like love. Allan was younger, a film producer with ambition in his eyes and a confidence that set him apart from the timid companions of Tab's past. Their connection began in the way so many Hollywood bonds did. A professional spark, a shared project, long conversations about the industry that stretched into the night. But somewhere between the scripts and the plans, something shifted. One evening, after a dinner that ran later than either had expected, Allan walked Tab to his car. There was no press, no handlers, no one watching. And in that silence, Tab let himself linger just a moment longer than he should have. Allan didn't pull away. That was the difference. So many times before, Tab's life had been filled with quick glances, half-whispered goodbyes, touches that dissolved the second they began. But Allan stayed. His hand remained where it was, steady, warm, unashamed. From then on, their closeness deepened. Tab, once forced to fake dates with starlets for the cameras, could now enjoy quiet breakfasts with Allan, no script required. They cooked together, traveled together, fell asleep on the same couch watching old movies. What had always been stolen in shadows with others, the casual brushing of hands, the comfort of leaning on someone's shoulder, the safety of waking up beside another man. With Allan, it became daily life. For Tab, it was nothing short of revolutionary. There were whispers, of course. Neighbors saw the two coming and going, noticed that Allan's car was always in the driveway. In another era, it might have spelled disaster. But by then, Tab had endured enough betrayals to know that real love was worth the risk. And Allan was more than worth it. When the old fears crept in, when Tab found himself scanning over his shoulder out of habit, Allan's presence pulled him back. He didn't just share the secret. He carried it with Tab until it no longer felt like a burden. Years turned into decades. They traveled across Europe, walked beaches in California, hosted dinners where laughter echoed louder than the memories of scandal. And through it all, Allan never demanded the mask. He wanted only the man beneath it. Tab, who had once hidden even his laughter, now let himself smile freely in Allan's company. It was Allan who stood beside him when the memoir was written, who encouraged him to finally tell the story the studios had buried. And when the documentary cameras rolled years later, it was Allan's hand you could see, steadying him as he spoke of the life he once thought he could never admit to. For Tab, Allan was more than a partner. He was proof that love could survive the weight of secrets, the cruelty of Hollywood, and the passing of time. After a lifetime of hiding, Tab Hunter's truth came with Allan Glaser, a man who gave him the one thing Hollywood never could, a love that didn't need to be erased. In the end, Tab Hunter's story was never just about scandal or betrayal. It was about survival, about a man who lived through decades when a single rumor could have destroyed him, yet still found the courage to love. From fleeting romances in the shadows, to friendships tangled in secrecy, to betrayals that nearly broke him, every chapter led to the same truth. He never stopped searching for connection. And finally, with Allan Glaser, he found it. Not in a headline, not in a studio script, but in real life, in a love that lasted. That was Tab Hunter's greatest victory. Not the fame, not the box office, not the glossy magazine covers. It was the fact that after a lifetime of hiding, he got to live his truth. And he did not have to live it alone. His journey is a reminder that even in the harshest times, even under the brightest and most unforgiving spotlight, authenticity has power. Secrets can wound, betrayals can scar, but love, when it finally arrives, can outlast them all. Tab Hunter was Hollywood's golden boy. But beyond the posters and premieres, he was something far more extraordinary. A man who dared to seek love in a world that told him he couldn't. And in the end, he found it. And his story doesn't just belong to the past, it echoes now. Because every hidden letter, every whispered secret, every love forced into the dark reminds us how much was risked just to be human. Tab Hunter carried that weight, and yet he still carved out a life, a career, and finally a love that endured. That is what makes his legacy unforgettable. If this journey through Hollywood's hidden history moved you, don't let it end here. Hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell, because there are more untold stories, more secrets the studios tried to bury, and more truths waiting in the shadows. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Two of Hollywood's dream men caught bathing together. Cary Grant, the perfect gentleman. Randolph Scott, the rugged cowboy. On screen, they seduced women everywhere. Off-screen, they had a secret Hollywood could not afford to expose. Back then, even the slightest hint of intimacy between two men could mean the end of a career. So were they simply close friends or forbidden lovers the industry would never dare acknowledge? To find the truth, we must step into the shadows Hollywood never wanted us to see. Hollywood's golden age sparkled with red carpets, champagne nights, and stars sculpted to look untouchable. But behind the glow lay shadows the studios prayed no one would ever glimpse. This was an empire of illusion, where the image of a leading man was everything, and a single whisper, a single photograph, could shatter it all. And in the 1930s and 40s, no rumor was more toxic than the suggestion that a matinee idol might desire other men. Masculinity wasn't just expected, it was the very currency of stardom. A leading man had to be irresistible to women, flawless in charm, untouchable in strength. Even the faintest suspicion of intimacy between men wasn't gossip, it was career death. Yet somehow, Cary Grant and Randolph Scott appeared to dance on the edge of that very blade. At the height of their fame, they were photographed together inside a Malibu mansion, lounging in robes, reading newspapers side by side, their smiles hinting at something the cameras weren't supposed to capture. To fans, it looked playful, even charming. To insiders, it looked like fire waiting to ignite. The press called their home Bachelor Hall. The photos were printed, the jokes whispered, but the questions never died. Why would two of the most desired men in America choose to share not just a house, but a life? Were they bound by friendship? Or were they protecting a secret so dangerous the industry worked tirelessly to bury it? This isn't just the tale of two actors. It's the story of how Hollywood would go to maintain control, to keep its illusions intact, and to hide the shadows behind its golden glow. And as we peel back the curtain, we step closer to a mystery that has refused to fade even after nearly a century. Before he became the world's most polished gentleman, he was Archie Leach, a boy from Bristol, England, who grew up with little more than hardship and a hunger to escape. His childhood was not the stuff of fairy tales, but it planted in him a drive that would carry him across an ocean and into a world of reinvention. In America, Archie found his stage. Vaudeville, acrobatics, performance. It was here he mastered the art of transformation. Each role became a mask, each routine an escape from the shadows of his past. And when Hollywood called, Archie Leach disappeared entirely, replaced by a new creation as carefully crafted as any role he would ever play. Cary Grant. The name alone shimmered with elegance. The man himself was perfection. Tall, broad-shouldered, impossibly handsome, with a transatlantic accent that seemed to exist somewhere between continents, belonging everywhere and nowhere at once. He was the studio's ultimate invention, the perfect gentleman, the man every woman dreamed of and every man envied. Audiences believed in him completely. On screen, his wit sparkled in screwball comedies, his charm captivated in romantic dramas, and his elegance turned dangerous under Alfred Hitchcock's lens. By the late 1930s, Cary Grant wasn't simply a movie star, he was the movie star. Hollywood's crown jewel, the embodiment of sophistication itself. To millions, he wasn't acting, he was the fantasy of romance made flesh. But perfection has a price. Away from the cameras, Grant confessed that Cary Grant often felt like a role he could never shed. Even in private, the tuxedo gentleman clung to him like a second skin. The world adored the image, but the man behind it was restless, unsure, and often desperately alone. His personal life betrayed the cracks in the facade. 5 marriages came and went, none delivering the peace the public assumed he already possessed. How could the world's most charming man, the embodiment of love on screen, fail so often at love in real life? The question followed him, whispered through studios and across headlines. Rumors gathered in those shadows. Friends hinted he sometimes feared the mask had swallowed the man, that he struggled with who he really was when the lights went out. Hollywood buzzed with speculation. Was Cary Grant's endless charm a performance too perfect to be real? Were the women in his life proof of romance, or props in a script written to protect something more dangerous to reveal? The contradictions haunted him. His career soared higher with every film, yet his private life remained unsettled, uneasy, marked by questions he never answered. And perhaps the answers weren't in the glamorous women who filled his movies, or in the failed marriages that trailed behind him. Perhaps they lay elsewhere, in the quiet moments when the mask slipped, in the company of someone who didn't see Cary Grant, the gentleman, but Archie, the man. Someone who offered a kind of comfort Hollywood could never script. That someone was Randolph Scott. If Cary Grant was Hollywood's gentleman, then Randolph Scott was its cowboy. Born in Virginia at the turn of the century, Scott grew up in a world of tradition, discipline, and restraint. He carried that Southern sense of dignity with him his entire life. Tall, broad-shouldered, with steel blue eyes, and a posture that radiated quiet confidence. He looked less like a creation of the studios and more like a figure pulled straight from the American frontier. Hollywood seized on that image quickly. By the mid-1930s, Scott had become a fixture in westerns, the genre that defined American masculinity. He wasn't flamboyant, he wasn't theatrical. He was steady, reliable, and resolute. On screen, he was the man who restored order when chaos threatened, the cowboy who defended the innocent, then rode away into the sunset without asking for glory. He represented strength without arrogance, courage without vanity. Audiences trusted him. If Cary Grant was champagne and tuxedos, Randolph Scott was leather boots and dust. His presence offered reassurance, calm, controlled, almost mythic. To the moviegoer, he wasn't just playing a cowboy. He was the cowboy. But off-screen, Scott was far harder to pin down. Unlike many of his contemporaries, he didn't splash his personal life across the tabloids. There were no dramatic romances, no late-night scandals, no public meltdowns. He spoke sparingly to the press, revealing just enough to satisfy curiosity, but never enough to invite intrusion. In an industry built on exposure, Scott practiced discretion with surgical precision. That discretion only made him more intriguing. Friends described him as loyal, private, even guarded. To some, he seemed impenetrable. To others, surprisingly warm and gentle when the cameras weren't around. The paradox was magnetic. On screen, he embodied rugged openness. Off-screen, he was a closed door. Hollywood thrived on stars whose private lives mirrored their roles. But with Scott, the two never quite aligned. His stoicism made him fascinating, but it also made him unknowable. Audiences projected their fantasies onto him, while colleagues quietly speculated about the man behind the cowboy mask. Who was Randolph Scott when the cameras stopped rolling? The mystery only deepened as his career soared. He lived with a level of restraint unusual for the era, a kind of deliberate silence that spoke louder than scandal ever could. It was as though Scott understood that in Hollywood, the less you revealed, the more people would wonder. Two men, two carefully crafted archetypes. Cary Grant, the polished gentleman, and Randolph Scott, the rugged cowboy. On paper, they belonged to different worlds. Tuxedos versus 10-gallon hats, champagne versus whiskey. And yet, fate would bring them together, not just as colleagues or friends, but as two men whose lives would intertwine so closely that Hollywood was forced to invent new ways to explain it. In that chapter, the one written inside the walls of Bachelor Hall, would become one of the most whispered about mysteries of Hollywood's golden age. What happened behind those walls would blur the line between friendship and something Hollywood never dared admit. In the early 1930s, when Cary Grant and Randolph Scott decided to share a home in Malibu, it seemed innocent enough. Hollywood was filled with bachelors renting houses together, a way to cut costs in a notoriously expensive town. But this was no ordinary arrangement, and this was no ordinary house. Perched above the ocean, the mansion was bright, airy, and elegant, a place that should have been a backdrop for endless parties, glamorous women, and the kind of excess people expected from Hollywood's leading men. Instead, it became something far more curious. When the press got wind of it, they gave the house a nickname that stuck: Bachelor Hall. Soon, photographs began to circulate, images that looked harmless at first glance, but strangely intimate the longer you stared. Cary, reclining in a lounge chair by the pool, Randolph beside him, the two of them leaning over a single newspaper as though it were their daily ritual. Another shot captured them in matching robes, sipping coffee, their bodies angled toward each other in a way that felt more than playful. In one of the most widely published photos, they stood in the kitchen shoulder to shoulder, sleeves rolled up, cooking dinner together like a long-married couple. Neighbors had their own stories. They recalled the two men tending the garden side by side, debating roses and hedges as if it were their shared domain. They played tennis in the yard, calling out scores with laughter that drifted across the property line. On warm evenings, they were seen walking the beach together, silhouettes moving in rhythm against the fading light. Friends noticed details harder to dismiss. One remembered Cary fussing about the curtains, only for Randolph to tease him before quietly fixing them himself. Another swore he overheard them bickering in the kitchen, Cary insisting on too much salt, Randolph reminding him he always overcooked the pasta, an argument that ended not in anger but in laughter. These weren't the scenes of two stars simply sharing a house. They were the quiet rituals of people who knew each other's habits by heart. Others were convinced the bond went deeper. One guest recalled Cary teasing Randolph about his slow serve, Randolph replying under his breath, "That's why you keep me around, to fix the things you can't." Another claimed he once heard Randolph call from another room, "Dinner's ready, darling." Perhaps a joke, perhaps not. And more than one visitor remarked how their disagreements always melted quickly, dissolving into the kind of laughter that belongs only to those who share more than friendship. To the public, these snapshots were framed as comedy. Magazine spreads teased, "Hollywood's most eligible bachelors making the most of single life." Readers chuckled, amused at the sight of two icons playing house. But inside Hollywood, the mood was sharper. Executives frowned, agents whispered. Reporters hinted at a subtext they dared not print. In a town where even the hint of intimacy between men could destroy careers, images like these weren't cheeky. They were dangerous. And yet, Grant and Scott didn't seem to care. They posed for the photos. They lived openly at Bachelor Hall, as though daring Hollywood to make of it what it would. One insider later remarked, "You could laugh at the pictures, but you couldn't ignore them. They looked too much like a couple. They looked happy." And perhaps that was the most unsettling image of all. Not scandal, not secrecy, but happiness. Happiness that seemed to exist beyond the reach of the studios, beyond the rigid scripts of Hollywood's golden illusion. To the outside world, it was a running joke. To the studios, it was a problem to be managed. But to the two men who lived inside those walls, Bachelor Hall may have been something else entirely. A sanctuary, a place where Cary didn't have to be Cary Grant, and Randolph didn't have to be the stoic cowboy. Was Bachelor Hall simply a house of friendship, two men finding comfort in each other's company? Or was it something far riskier? A quiet rebellion, a forbidden love story hidden in plain sight, challenging an industry built on control and denial? No one ever gave a clear answer about what truly happened inside Bachelor Hall. But Hollywood had no choice but to respond. The photographs, the laughter, the unmistakable domesticity, they refused to fade quietly. They turned into whispers, and the whispers became something the studios could no longer ignore. At first, they were little more than jokes told in smoky Hollywood clubs, quips about two of the most desirable men in the industry preferring each other's company. But in an era when reputation was everything, whispers had a way of hardening into threats. The studios were watching. They had invested millions into Cary Grant and Randolph Scott, not as men, but as illusions. Grant was Hollywood's perfect gentleman, irresistible to women. Scott was its cowboy hero, the embodiment of rugged masculinity. If those images cracked, the machine itself was at risk, and so the whispers had to be smothered. The solution was as old as Hollywood itself, the beard marriage. Pair a bachelor star with a woman, preferably glamorous, and present it to the public as proof of normalcy. Nothing silenced suspicion faster than a wedding announcement. Cary Grant's marriages became part of that cycle. He wed multiple times: Virginia Sherrill, Barbara Hutton, Betsy Drake, Diane Cannon. Each marriage was greeted with the same headlines: "Hollywood's most charming gentleman finds his match." But the stories rarely lasted. The marriages faltered, some ending in bitter divorces, others fading quietly into distance. Each time, the studios tightened the narrative. Each time, the whispers found their way back. Randolph Scott's case was different. In 1936, he married heiress Marion DuPont, though the marriage lasted barely 3 years. Later, he wed actress Patricia Stillman, a marriage that endured until his death. To the public, Scott became the picture of stability, the cowboy who finally hung up his spurs at home. And yet, even then, the questions never entirely stopped. How could a man who had spent so many years living openly with Cary Grant suddenly slip seamlessly into a conventional life? Was it love, or was it necessity? Behind the scenes, the studios worked tirelessly to manage appearances. Publicists planted stories of double dates and glamorous evenings. Fan magazines published staged photographs, Grant dancing with leading ladies, Scott appearing with socialites. Gossip columnists were quietly instructed to soften their tone. For every whisper, there was a counter-narrative ready to be printed. But even as the headlines celebrated their marriages, rumors slipped through the cracks. A hotel clerk swore Grant and Scott once checked in together under false names. A columnist claimed she saw them leaving a party long after the crowd had gone. A costume designer whispered that she caught them sharing a cigarette in silence backstage, so close it felt like the room itself was intruding. None of it could be proven. None of it ever fully disappeared. In Hollywood, silence often spoke louder than spin. Guests at parties claimed they still saw the two men gravitate toward one another, even when surrounded by crowds. A story circulated of a producer catching them laughing together in a corner, so absorbed that they didn't notice the room watching. Another recalled seeing Grant slip a hand briefly onto Scott's shoulder, a gesture so natural and unguarded it looked less like friendship and more like habit. These were fragments, shadows of a story that could never be told outright. Perhaps the marriages were genuine attempts at domesticity. Perhaps they were shields. Perhaps they were both. What mattered most to the studios was not the truth, but the illusion. The system itself was built to enforce those illusions. In the Golden Age, contracts gave studios total control over a star's image. They could dictate who you dated, where you appeared, even what your home looked like. If the public thought Cary Grant was a devoted husband, then that was who he had to be. If they believed Randolph Scott was a family man, then that became his reality. Truth was negotiable. Perception was everything. And yet, the questions never died. If the marriages were covers, they were fragile ones, unable to erase the memory of Bachelor Hall, unable to silence the laughter that spilled from that Malibu home. The image of two men living as though they needed no one else lingered in the background, daring the world to reconsider what it thought it knew. Were the whispers nothing more than gossip inflated by a hungry press? Or were they glimpses of a reality Hollywood could never acknowledge? The industry's answer was clear: deny, distract, control. But for the public and for history, the truth remained tantalizingly out of reach. What few outsiders understood was just how deep that control ran. In Hollywood's golden age, a star's life did not belong to himself, it belonged to the studios. Every contract was a set of chains disguised as opportunity. Executives decided what roles you played, what parties you attended, and more disturbingly, who you were seen with when the flashbulbs went off. Image was everything. And for Cary Grant and Randolph Scott, that image was a matter of survival. The system was ruthless in its precision. If whispers suggested Cary was too close to Randolph, publicists arranged a dinner date with an actress and made sure the cameras were there to catch it. If Scott appeared too comfortable at Bachelor Hall, the fan magazines suddenly ran spreads about his supposed interest in socialites. It was a choreography of deception, carefully plotted to drown out what no one dared say aloud. Cary Grant became a master at playing the role off-screen as well as on. At banquets, he dazzled the room, arms draped over starlets, charm switched on like a spotlight. But friends noticed that the moment the photographers turned away, his expression often fell, his shoulders lowering as though the performance was too heavy to carry for long. Randolph, quieter by nature, played his part differently. He let the press label him as the steadfast cowboy, the man of quiet strength. He posed when he had to, but when the lights dimmed, he seemed to shrink back into himself. Until Cary appeared, and then the old ease returned. Stories leaked, even when the machine worked its hardest. A hotel clerk whispered that two men checked in under assumed names, only to emerge the next morning laughing like schoolboys. A columnist hinted that she had seen Grant and Scott leaving a party long after the crowd had gone, walking side by side into the shadows of Sunset Boulevard. A costume designer swore she once caught them sharing a cigarette backstage, leaning so close that it felt wrong to interrupt. None of it was ever proven. All of it added fuel to the fire. The studios, of course, denied everything. They reminded the public of Cary's latest marriage, of Randolph's quiet family life. They pushed glossy images into fan magazines. Cary smiling with a glamorous leading lady on his arm, Randolph at a polo match with Hollywood's elite. But beneath the sheen, there were cracks that no amount of spin could seal. One writer later recalled, "You could stage a romance for the cameras, but you couldn't stage the way Cary looked at Randolph when he thought no one was watching." It was a dangerous balancing act, a tightrope strung high above the glittering world of Hollywood, where one misstep meant ruin. For every staged kiss on the cheek, there was a moment of unguarded laughter that looked too intimate. For every photograph of Cary with a socialite, there was the memory of him and Randolph in matching robes at Bachelor Hall. Illusion and reality bled together, until no one, not even Cary or Randolph themselves, could be certain where the performance ended and the truth began. Some friends insisted the bond was merely loyalty, forged in the pressure cooker of stardom. Others hinted, with careful words and knowing glances, that it was something deeper, something Hollywood could never acknowledge. The line between friendship and love blurred into a haze of secrecy, leaving only speculation in its wake. And yet, that very speculation gave the story its enduring power. The tighter the studios pulled the reins, the more people whispered. The more carefully the illusion was maintained, the more obvious the cracks became. It was as if the act of denying only confirmed that there was something worth denying. For Cary Grant and Randolph Scott, the industry's control was both shield and prison. It protected their careers, but it suffocated their truth. They were stars crafted for an audience, yet off-screen, they seemed to live in a play of their own, one that the world was never meant to see. And so the question lingered, as it always had. Were they simply two men navigating the same machine, bound by circumstance and friendship? Or were they partners in something forbidden, fighting to preserve a fragile happiness in the shadows of an empire built on illusion? If the industry kept their public lives on a tight leash, it was the private glimpses, the stories whispered by those who saw them up close, that kept the mystery alive. The studios could spin the headlines, but they couldn't silence the people who had been close enough to see Cary and Randolph when the cameras weren't around. And it was those glimpses, fragmented, contradictory, impossible to pin down, that have haunted their story ever since. Some who knew them swore it was friendship, nothing more. They described two men bound by loyalty, by the pressure of navigating fame in a town that devoured its own. One colleague insisted they were like brothers, inseparable, but not in the way people like to imagine. But others weren't so sure. A director remembered visiting Bachelor Hall and being struck by what he called a domestic intimacy. Cary fussing over Randolph's tie before dinner. Randolph quietly topping off Cary's glass without being asked. "It wasn't romantic in front of us," he said years later. but it was the kind of comfort you don't fake. Even those who dismissed the rumors often revealed more than they intended. One actor from their circle once laughed, "No, they weren't lovers. They just lived together, traveled together, ate together, vacationed together." His voice trailed off, as though realizing mid-sentence that the defense only deepened the suspicion. The contradictions piled up. Friends who rejected the whispers also admitted the two men were nearly inseparable. Cary was said to have once introduced Randolph at a dinner party simply as, "the man who makes my house a home." Was it a joke, a slip, or a confession disguised as charm? And then there were the moments people only whispered about. A housekeeper claimed she once found 2 sets of clothes laid out neatly at the foot of the same bed. A producer swore he saw them holding hands briefly in a darkened theater, pulling away as soon as the lights came up. Another guest remembered hearing music drifting from Bachelor Hall late at night. Cary's laughter over the piano, Randolph's voice low and steady, finishing the song. None of these stories were ever confirmed. Some may have been exaggerated, others invented outright. But together, they painted a picture that refused to fade. Two men whose lives were so intertwined that calling it only friendship felt insufficient, yet calling it love was a step Hollywood would never take. And maybe that's why the mystery has lasted so long. Friendship and love often occupy the same space. The line between them is invisible, shifting, undefinable. Cary Grant and Randolph Scott lived in that space, in the gray area where loyalty, affection, and intimacy blur together until no one, perhaps not even the two of them, could draw a clean divide. What they were to each other remains unanswered. What is certain is that they found in one another something powerful enough to survive whispers, marriages, and the suffocating control of Hollywood itself. And that alone makes their bond one of the most compelling enigmas of the Golden Age. As the Golden Age faded, so did its brightest stars. Cary Grant remained the embodiment of elegance, but behind the charm he admitted to unease. "Everybody wants to be Cary Grant. Even I want to be Cary Grant," he once joked, hinting that even he felt trapped inside the illusion. Randolph Scott, by contrast, retired quietly, living out his days in privacy with Patricia Stillman. Yet those who visited him later in life whispered of photographs of Cary still on display, small relics of a bond never spoken aloud. In 1986, Grant died at 82. The obituaries praised his grace, but between the lines, the shadow of Randolph Scott lingered. A year later, Scott followed. Two men, intertwined for decades, leaving the world almost together. Gentleman and cowboy, champagne and leather, separate graves but bound in memory. Biographers have argued ever since. Some insist it was friendship magnified by gossip. Others see a hidden love story, carefully erased by a repressed industry. No side can prove its case. Both circle the same fragments, the same photographs, the same laughter echoing from Bachelor Hall. And still, the mystery endures. Each generation rediscovers the images. Two men in robes, smiling as if no one else existed, and the same questions rise again. Were they brothers in arms against Hollywood's machine, or lovers daring to exist in plain sight? Time has solved many riddles of the Golden Age, but not this one. What remains is not certainty, but possibility. And perhaps that is why their story still haunts us, because it was never meant to be answered. Even now, nearly a century later, the image survives. Two men by the sea, framed by sunlight and shadow, daring the world to wonder what it truly meant. Nearly a century has passed since Cary Grant and Randolph Scott first moved into Bachelor Hall, and still their story refuses to fade. The photographs, the whispers, the unanswered questions, they have become more than gossip. They are a window into Hollywood itself, a mirror reflecting both its glamour and its darkest silences. Because this was never just about two men. It was about an industry that built legends by erasing truths. A machine that sculpted images so flawless they could survive generations, but demanded that the people behind those images surrender parts of themselves. Hollywood insisted its leading men be symbols of desire, untouchable and perfect. Yet what if perfection meant hiding who you really were? That is the weight Cary Grant and Randolph Scott carried. On screen, they were everything audiences wanted. The gentleman in a tuxedo, the cowboy in the saddle. Off-screen, they seemed to have found in each other a comfort that neither the studios nor the headlines could script. And that quiet defiance, whether it was friendship, love, or something between, still resonates today. For modern audiences, their story matters because it reveals how fragile the boundary between truth and illusion once was. A single photograph of two men sipping coffee in robes could spark alarm. A laugh in the kitchen, a hand on the shoulder, could ripple through gossip columns like an earthquake. Happiness itself had to be censored. Hollywood's golden age promised fantasy, but in Cary Grant and Randolph Scott, we glimpsed something more fragile and more real. Two men, caught between the roles they were forced to play and the lives they may have wanted to live. That tension, the line between image and reality, is why we still care. It speaks not just to the past but to us, here and now, in a world still wrestling with the price of visibility and the hunger for acceptance. So we return, again and again, to the same images. Two men in Malibu, smiling in sunlight, framed not as scandal but as possibility. Gentleman and cowboy, champagne and leather, friendship or love, or something that refuses to fit into either box. And perhaps that is the legacy, not the answer, but the question itself. A question that continues to echo across time, reminding us that behind Hollywood's most perfect illusions were lives too human, too complex, and too precious to ever fully disappear. In the end, what Cary Grant and Randolph Scott truly shared may never be proven, but what their story leaves behind is undeniable. A glimpse into the cost of illusion, the fragility of image, and the timeless search for belonging, even in the most unforgiving spotlight. That's why nearly a century later, we're still asking the same questions. Not because we expect a definitive answer, but because the mystery itself tells us something about Hollywood and about ourselves. If this story pulled you into the shadows of the golden age, don't let go just yet. Subscribe, share your thoughts below, and let us know. Do you believe Cary and Randolph were simply friends, or something Hollywood could never admit? The truth may be lost to time, but the conversation is ours to keep alive.